Welcome to the Explainer. All right, today we are jumping headfirst into one of the most puzzling, most debated passages in the entire Bible. That's right, the beginning of Revelation chapter 11. Now, it is packed with some pretty wild visions, strange commands, and symbolic numbers. But what if I told you the key to unlocking it all isn't found in some far-off future, but in a very specific, very real moment in history? So it all kicks off with the Apostle John getting this, well, it's a measuring stick, basically. And an angel tells him, get up and measure the temple of God, the altar, and the people worshiping there. He's being told to survey God's sacred space. But here's the twist. As we're about to see, a huge part of the temple is supposed to be left out, on purpose. So you have to ask, what's this measuring all about? I mean, it's pretty clear this isn't about getting out a tape measure for some literal blueprints. This is symbolic. So our first job is to figure out what this action really stands for. And honestly, how you answer that question really depends on the lens you use to read Revelation. Do you see it as a prophecy about things way, way in the future? Or, and this is what we're going to dig into today, was it a powerful message for the people living right then and there? Okay, so to crack this vision, we've got to start by unpacking the symbols. First, what in the world does it mean to measure something in a prophecy like this? And maybe more importantly, why is there this really sharp line drawn between what gets measured and what gets totally ignored? Well, in the ancient world, and especially in the Bible, measuring something wasn't just about size. It was an act of claiming ownership. It was God drawing a line in the sand and basically saying, this part is mine. And no matter what's coming, I'm going to protect it, I'm going to preserve it. Yeah, exactly. The scholar Faber puts it perfectly here. He says this act of measuring is basically the same thing as sealing God's people. It's like placing a divine seal of protection on the faithful, marking them as separate from all the chaos and judgment that's about to be unleashed. And this is where that sharp line gets drawn. The text makes this incredibly stark division. You've got the inner temple, the altar, and the true worshipers. They all get measured. They're marked for preservation. But the outer court? Nope. It's explicitly left out. John is told, don't even bother measuring it, because it's been given over to the Gentiles, the foreign nations, to be trampled underfoot. So you get this powerful contrast, a protected core and an outer area that's just left for judgment. And this prophecy doesn't just say what's going to happen, it tells us how long it's going to last. This is where a prophetic clock starts ticking, and you're going to want to pay close attention to the numbers. So the clock starts with this number. The text says the holy city is going to be trampled for exactly 42 months. Now, just tuck that number away, because it's the first major clue in this puzzle. Because then, in the very same chapter, we're told about another event, the work of two prophets, these two witnesses, and their ministry is said to last for 1,260 days. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, 42 and 1,260, those are completely different numbers. But are they really? And boom, here's the connection. If you do the math, 42 months comes out to 3.5 years. And 1,260 days, you guessed it, also 3.5 years. This is absolutely not a coincidence. This number pops up again and again in biblical prophecy, and it almost always points to a specific, intense period of suffering and judgment. So this very consistent time frame, it's not random. It's a massive clue. And according to one major interpretation, this clock isn't pointing to some event in our future. No, it's pointing to a very specific, very devastating period in ancient history. Okay, so let's put this to the test. Let's take our 3.5-year prophetic clock and lay it over a real historical timeline from that era. What we find? Well, it's pretty startling. That historical event? It's the Jewish-Roman War. That 3.5-year period lines up almost perfectly with the final, most brutal years of that war, a conflict that ended with the Roman army completely leveling the city of Jerusalem and its magnificent temple. And here is where it gets really specific. I mean, historical records from that time, they paint a picture that just matches the prophecy detail for detail. The holy city, Jerusalem, was literally trampled underfoot by Roman armies. Historians from the period tell us that rebel factions actually took over the temple's outer court, desecrating it, using it as a military fortress. Meanwhile, the inner sanctuary, the part that was measured, it stayed largely untouched until the absolute final bitter end of the siege. But wait, there's more. Remember those two witnesses who prophesied during that same 1,260-day period? Well, who they are gives us yet another clue that fits right into this historical framework. Now, people have different ideas about this, for sure. Some think these are two literal guys, like Moses and Elijah, who are going to show up someday in the future. But another view, one that lines up with the history, sees them as symbols. In this interpretation, the two witnesses are the law and the prophets, the very heart of God's word to Israel. And their death in the story symbolizes how that word was being rejected and silenced by the corrupt powers in Jerusalem just before the city fell. So, let's put all the pieces together. We have the measuring, which means preservation. We have the unmeasured court, which means judgment. We have that super specific 3.5-year clock. And we have the historical events of the war from 66 to 70 AD that match it perfectly. When you see it all laid out, it completely reframes how you can read this passage. What this view shows us is that maybe, just maybe, Revelation 11 wasn't written as a cryptic blueprint for the 21st century, but as a deeply relevant and powerful message for its original audience. It becomes a story about God spiritually protecting his faithful remnant, the true worshipers in that inner measured temple, all while allowing a terrible but foretold judgment to fall on the city and the religious system that had ultimately rejected him. And that leaves us with a really fascinating question to chew on. If a prophecy like this finds its perfect fulfillment in a past historical event, what does that mean for us today? Does that make it less important, or does it actually make it more powerful by showing us that God's word isn't just about the distant future, but is deeply, actively involved in the real messy crises of human history? Something to think about.